I definitely feel those times does push me away because then I lead to think like, why am I even spending my time standing here when I could be working on other things to talk to you about my day, but you choose to look at your laptop or you choose to look at your phone instead of actually listening to me.
Hello, I'm Sam.
And I'm Amelia.
Welcome back to Us Duo podcast where we aim to build a better mindset for better relationships.
This week on relationships, we are talking about lack of communication and the causes that may trigger lack of communication. We may think that lack of communication is arguments, but we're taking an approach where there is arguments, but then there's also other scenarios where it's not in argument based and how things may affect and cause lack of communication.
Yes, relationships is a big conversation, but when it comes to communication, it is inevitable that we go through phases and stages through our relationship where sometimes it may break down in terms of communication.
Or just lacks communication sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. So before we begin, what are your personal thoughts on what may potentially break down
Our relationship.
the lack of communication within relationships.
Well, I'm just going to talk with personal experience. I think within us, what sometimes causes lack of communication between us is obviously the one that everyone knows of is time. We, as a person individually, we are quite individuals. We're not like a couple where I would say that we do everything together. Like you individually do your own hobbies, own things, have your own time, and you like spending time alone. And I'm quite like that as well. So I think sometimes when we are both driven to work hard in career or do our own things and hobbies like working out at gym and stuff, things like this take time away from us to connect together as well. Like not saying that we can't do it together and we don't because we do go to the gym together, but there are these external factors sometimes that bleed into our lifestyle and our time. And that's why for me personally, I'd say you have to make the time to communicate or make time for each other. Otherwise, you can always say that we're busy. And realistically, that does happen. Life just gets busy. And I think that's one cause of lack of communication.
That is a common occurrence when it comes to being busy. But another one that came off the dome for me is the hesitation to speak. And the hesitation to speak is in portray what your thoughts are initially. So
you don't know what you want to say yet. You haven't articulated
No.
it.
So more so you know what you want to say, but you know that if you say it, it's going to hurt the other person. And
because
I think
you're blunt.
Because I'm blunt. And it's just an experience from my relationship experience holistically from a perspective of, this is how I think and this is how I feel. But holding back as to what I want to truly say, it's more from my perspective of, like you said, I'm just so blunt that I just don't want to hurt the person straight away.
My other one is quite similar and it's not quite ready to talk. So sometimes say we did actually go into an argument or there are some tension, like no argument has happened yet, but there's some tension. And I think the lack of communication is I'm not ready to talk because sometimes my thought process is usually, why am I acting like this or why am I thinking like this? And I haven't even processed it myself. So I feel like it's not the right time to say it to someone else yet, like voicing it to you, because if I voice it to you and I'm unsure what I'm thinking or why this is happening, why am I confusing someone else when I haven't figured it out myself? But at the same time, I think it's good to speak up when you feel like this. So maybe voice like, I'm feeling a bit frustrated today. I don't really know the reason why. But to say that up front, at least it gives the other person the heads up.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And I feel that for me, lack the ability to have the or that chat when we actually communicate the issue. And it's just maybe a hesitation, as my previous point, on the fact that I need a little bit more time to think about it or I can't process it at that point in time. So I feel like I'm a little delayed when it comes to a disagreement or an argument at that point in time.
And then some that are more on argument, I think it can also come across, especially when we argue or have disagreements, is the lack of understanding each other's side. which sometimes can be natural because everyone thinks differently. But in a heated moment or in a disagreeing moment, you're just seeing your own side and you're lacking that understanding of the other person's side. And then that naturally draws you away from the other person and feeling more distant. And sometimes that builds over time into other things. And then you start to feel, why do I need to share my point when I'm not being heard? So there are these points for us that causes lack of communication sometimes.
Yeah. And to tap onto what you just said, it's that building up on that resentment because now you're starting to resent the person in terms of how you
Why you
feel
hate me?
arguing and things like that. So you're like, this mother trucker
Mother beep.
is annoying me and I do not want to talk.
Don't hate me. But yeah, these are our reasons. But there are many other reasons out there that other couples may experience. So we're going to highlight some of those.
Yeah, so I see the lack of communication broken down into two stages. So it's the early stages and then you've got your long-term stage. Now, within whatever the other causes are in the early stages, within the early stage, I feel that the fear of conflict is a big thing that really is a common occurrence within that early stage. And that's something that I definitely felt within my experiences of having or being in a relationship is like, because you just don't know the person, you just don't know. It's like an uncharted territory. You're still developing your relationship, but the fear of that conflict because you don't know how that person feels initially.
And I think confrontation is such a struggle with a lot of people, not just in relationships, but it's also because this person means so much to you, fear of conflict, because that people pleasing sort of mindset, or you want to make sure that you're showing the best side of you to the other person. So sometimes the fear of conflict can prevent you from communicating. But I think conflict isn't always a bad thing. And if you think of it that way, it would really help open up and help you share your thoughts. And also the approach of how you share conflict or how you talk about conflict makes a massive difference. Because if you're really aggressive and just being like, why did you do this? I didn't like it. And you're like really angry and yelling at the person, as opposed to you being like, hey, can we have a chat? Because this thing that happened today, it really did disappoint me and I want to talk to you about it. Like these two different approaches to conflict really makes a difference.
Yeah, and I am definitely guilty of the approach as well, just coming from past experiences. And look, especially in the early stages, I felt that I probably could have done a better job in approaching the fear of conflict and just how the conversation came about. I don't know about you, but it took me time to navigate how to really control that conversation, how to approach the person,
Are you
especially
talking about me or are you talking about real relationships in general?
just relationships in general from my experiences. But even for you too, like at the start of our relationship, it was a bit difficult for me to come out about and approach it.
Well, I think it's only natural as well because when you first get to know someone or when you first get together with someone, that other person, as much as you like them, you've got to know them and done however many dates and met up and done all the fun stuff. Conflict is the last thing that is probably going to happen in the honeymoon phase. And during that time, you're communicating in ways where you're like, oh, this is great. I'm loving the dates. I'm having so much fun. But when conflict comes around, the communication through that, you've never experienced it. You don't know what's going to happen. And that fear of what's going to happen is what pulls people back. But I think it's something that we have to address as couples earlier on, because once you get into the habit of being in this fear of conflict, then over time you're just not going to communicate with your partner when things happen where it's a conflict or a negative or something that disappointed you. So the earlier you tackle this, the easier it is to communicate conflict.
Yeah. And talking about sharing openly, another point, or it leads to another point, which is more about the lack of trust. And the lack of trust really falls onto the same thing as conflict of interest, where
Conflict of interest.
Well,
What are we
not
looking
really.
at documents now?
yes, the fear of conflict more so, but in the fact of you're still trying to figure out that person, you're still relatively new. So you don't essentially trust the person. You don't know the vibe. You don't know how the person's going to react.
Mm.
So that restriction on how you could really be hesitant to openly share?
Yeah, this one really was something that I struggled with in communicating due to lack of trust, is because not the partner or past experience in relationships, it's just past experience in life. There's not a lot of people that I trust. And if I do trust, or I have gone that down that path where I'm like, okay, I'm going to trust this person with the things that I'm thinking or saying or sharing experiences, and it didn't turn out well, this led me to be like, okay, I'm not going to trust people anymore because it just didn't end up well, or I was vulnerable to give you my emotions, but I wasn't heard, or they took it the wrong way, and then all these things happened. So this was something that I struggled with, but at the same time, I do trust people quite easily at the same time. So I think it was just that I shared emotions and all that, and then the experiences over time was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be so open and honest. So it was finding that balance for me.
Yeah, talking about past experiences though, the emotional baggage. So bringing up baggage in the past of past experience, that can be also another addition to a lack of communication. Maybe you've got past experiences that had a negative effect to you in some way and form, and that's what stemmed the restriction or the hesitant to share openly, essentially.
Yeah. So these I find, or is the struggle or the challenge that people go through in terms of trying to communicate or not knowing if they should or shouldn't communicate earlier in relationships. But I think some of these can also carry across, whether it's like your first year, fifth year, 10th year, sometimes it happens. And like we said at the start, it's phases, because your lifestyle and what you're doing in that phase of time changes, and all of that can influence what you're trying to do in terms of communicating to the other person. Because essentially, when you're in a relationship, you're working on yourself, but you're also trying to work with the other person as well. So it's trying to include the other person. So another cause of lack of communication could be differences in communication style. This is something that we've talked about in the past in a different episode. And understanding this early on, I personally feel like it's a good thing to know, because everyone communicates differently. And some people might be open and honest and upfront like you, but then some people like to simmer on their thoughts and think about it before they talk about things. So these are the different things, and trying to understand that and not force the other person to talk the way that you talk. I think that's really important.
Yeah, the communication style, or the difference in communication style, that took me a bit of time to realize and to navigate. And as I mentioned this in the start, that was something that I definitely struggled with. When I was younger, I was very blunt, direct, and I didn't really know how to control or even just approach to start a conversation
Mm. Do you think we have different communication styles?
between each other.
Well, yeah. who else? Who else are you seeing?
Yeah, of course. I think.
Ooh.
Well, yeah. For me, I have always been quite upfront, though I feel towards the end of it, I'm not really saying end, but towards the later part of our relationship, I've probably changed a little bit
In what way?
in a way where I'm not as direct. Maybe something that you can
What do you
confirm.
mean not direct?
So I'm more hesitant. I'm more pulled back now in terms of how I say things.
I don't know. Let me think about it. I will circle back. I think in some ways our communication styles are quite similar. Like, this is just talking about communication in general. We're similar in a way that we just have deep conversations very naturally, and that might lead into just digging deeper into each other's emotional feelings and how we are in our day to day, and getting to know each other, which I think is important. This is all part of the communication. And I think that way is quite similar. But when it comes to conflict, or even going to say, like, hey, I want to go here for a date, or I want to go here and try out this place, and you're very upfront, you're just like, no, I don't want to do it. Whereas for me, I try to consider like bigger picture. I'm not saying you're not considerate, but my thought process is like, oh, because you asked me to go here means you really wanted to go to this place. So I will say yes and consider it because it's still time together. Whereas like very early on, you were just like straight up, no, like I don't want to do this, or this looks lame or whatever. And I used to back then would be really hurt because I'm just like, okay, you don't want to try this with me, or like you are so certain in what you want and what you don't want, and you straight up say no. So trying to understand that was our early stages of our relationship, and that was an interesting way of trying to learn each other's communication style.
Yeah, I was like, nah, fuck yeah, we're not going.
Yeah, literally that.
No, it's not.
And then one final part, the very sad point that may cause lack of communication and can lead to, and I think it's when two people in a relationship are truly growing apart. Maybe life stages are very different where it just can't gel together anymore, or it's just been a prolonged time where communication just wasn't working out, which leads to more lack of communication, and then relationships break up.
Yeah, it's a sad last point, but it is true. And a lot of relationships I've seen have happened due to lack of communication, or even just the relationship. I wouldn't say breaks or tumbles, but it essentially just breaks away because, yeah, like you said, they've got their own journey and forks in their life that they're navigating at the same time.
Have you experienced growing apart?
No,
Due to lack of communication?
no, definitely. I haven't personally felt that, but in terms of making a decision to break apart, that's a different story.
Yeah. But I mean, like,
But-
just purely because of
Yeah.
lack of communication.
No, definitely not. No.
Nice.
Good input.
I know. I share some good values.
Yeah.
But let's look at some signs or something that we can use to pick up early signs of lack of communication. What do you think these might be? For you, what do you pick up on?
Yeah. So cat out of the bag, just feeling distant. So in saying that, it's just you feeling something is slightly off within the relationship. And that's when that would begin the communication breakdown.
Feeling distant. Sometimes this might happen. Like we said, there's different phases. You might get busy. And then because you're busy, you're not really sharing too much of your day because you're so tired at the end of the day and you're just like, oh, I just want to chill or something like that. Like it doesn't have to be that one for one, but then it builds a distance. So sometimes you might pick up on that. And if you do feel that distant, just be like, hey, can we just take a day to hang together and actually go out and do something for ourselves rather than just doing our usual day-to-day routine? And just taking some time and moments for yourself. I know for couples who may have kids or are parents now, it's harder to find that. So sometimes distance might grow. But yeah, it's just feeling that and voicing it is really important. But another one is the argument side. So you're feeling that you guys are having more frequent arguments, and that's also another sign of like signs of lacking of communication, because maybe you didn't voice something at first and then the other person misunderstood you and they came back and it's like, hey, how come you didn't tell me about this? And then this whole argument starts happening. So more frequent arguments might be another sign. And then sometimes it's just taking a breather, stop and be like, hey, why are we arguing so much lately? And is it something that we're not sharing to each other more? Or, those type of things. So that's a sign.
Yeah. You're speaking as if you've got that hard experience.
Yeah, we've got 12 years in the bag. So
That frequent arguing is a really big one. And often we tend to overlook that at times. And I feel that because, with the busy time, if you're a parent, you've got kids and you got so much shit going on, sometimes it's just really slowing down, as you mentioned, and recollecting and rehoning as to what the hell's going on and talking about it really does mediate the situation.
And I think rather than just keep rolling with what's happening, it's like, oh, that person's a bit angry today. And then you just move on with your day. It's actually taking that time to stop and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, are you okay? And it's really getting to know the other person again and be like, what's going on? And because you do that, then you're building back up that emotional bond. In my personal experience, I think that has always really helped, because if you let the other person just keep getting angry, keep getting aggressive without asking, like, hey, what's wrong? Like, one, maybe you don't even realize that you're being a more like really PMSy, but to really just intervene that and be like, hey, what's wrong? Are you okay? Like, at least you're showing care in that way amongst this like tension that's happening.
Yeah, while we're talking about arguments, did you know that there are 5 fight languages?
I actually didn't know until I listened to Jay Shetty. He actually talked about this. So I didn't know that because I already knew that there's 5 love languages. And I found it really interesting that there's actually 5 fight languages.
Fight language?
Fight.
Yeah, even I didn't even know. But hey, fight languages, it will make sense when we start yapping on about it.
Muay Thai, boxing, kickboxing.
Wow, so physical. I like that.
Yeah, so number 1 is reflection action. So these are the ones where people would argue and then want to simmer on what's just happening and then going away and thinking about it and really reflect on that moment, that situation, and then coming back and taking action. So thinking about or talking to the other person, being, hey, how can we tackle this, or what can we do to make this better? So these are the types where it's a reflection action.
Yeah, and sometimes arguments end up happening at the worst times, like just before you go to sleep. So when you're in those heated moments, you just got to be like, hold up, let's just put this on pause and reschedule this and think about this.
Yeah, but at the same time, that's also, how people say don't go to bed angry. I actually believe in that because if you go to bed angry and then you wake up, your next day is sort
Wake
of
up the
turned to
Hulk.
shits.
Yeah.
Your next day has turned to shit. And that's why I think it's good to resolve it. There are people who believe in no matter how long it's going to take, if it's going to take the whole night, it's going to take the whole night. And I sort of believe in that, but I know that for you, sleep is important for you and you don't believe in that. So that's another way of communication style that I see is very different within us.
Yeah, but then at the same time, it's more on, like, the whole point is reflection to the action. It's really just simmering on what you're truly feeling. Well, what's the issue? But then also, how do you truly feel? What's the right way to approach an action and talk about it before really battling it out? Full martial arts style, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so with this one, people who have reflection action type of fight style, one tip is to just exercise patience if you understand that this is how a person may deal with conflict. Just give them time, let them simmer, and then come back to it.
Yeah. Second one is establish a safe environment. So, like I said, take some time to reflect. It's important to collect your mind, collect your thoughts, and actually think about it, but also reinstate that, like, this is a safe place. Let's actually be open, be transparent. This is where we have our conversation and fight it out.
Mm. So, second one is deflection. So, personally, I hate people who work through conflict like this. Hate is a strong word, but it really does grind my gears.
This is something you commonly see in dramas. Well, Asian dramas, I feel, is always very much like you're having a heated argument and someone changes the tone. Oh, hey, look, this
Well,
looks
it's
very
not
good
even
today.
an argument. It's usually in those romance dramas where maybe they like each other. They've discovered that they like each other, and then it's like the king and he likes a peasant. And they're like, hey, we need to talk about how we're going to take this into the future. And the peasant or the girl or someone is usually deflecting this whole thing and trying to run away, or like, oh my God, this food is so good, or oh, I want to go and buy some clothes, or this person has just asked to see me, I'm going to go now. So they're completely deflecting the whole situation so that they don't have to deal with the conflict or deal with talking about this serious topic. And I don't like this form of communication. I don't like this fight style because I feel like it's not productive. Nothing gets solved, and you're just prolonging this whole issue or this conflict or whatever's happening. Whereas if you just tackle it head on, get it over and done with, at least you're moving a step forward.
Yeah, you're essentially going around in circles with no real conclusion. That leads on to the next one, which is the opposite, really, is suppression to the explosion. And it's exactly what that is. And it's just bottling everything up until you just one day explode like a bloody TNT.
The volcano eruption.
Yeah, volcano eruption.
But this one I can see or understand why, because it could be more people who are trying to see the bigger picture or see two ends of it. So they don't want to come out and address the conflict just yet. They just want to either sit there and listen or simmer and think about what's happening, or maybe they're just considering that this is a one-time occasion, so they don't want to say something yet. But then over time, because they've suppressed it, and then it happens again and again, and then they break down and explode. So this is the suppression explosion.
Side question: do you think it's more on characters that are who don't like was it conflict?
No, I don't think so. I was gonna explain this later, but I think sometimes I have this suppression explosion, but that's because in other episodes I've explained how sometimes I don't quite understand how I'm feeling. It's not that I don't understand how I'm feeling, it's more like should I or should I not be angry about this? And that has happened through work sense, or someone has said something to me which is actually quite offensive, but me being the person that's like, oh, maybe it was just a joke, or maybe it's a one time thing. So I don't say anything and I'm quite delayed in responding. So it turns into suppression because now I've lost my opportunity to speak up. And then over time, this person might have said something that is still quite offensive. And then I get to a point where I'm sick of it and I actually explode. But because I explode without all these prior points of making a comment saying, hey, I don't like what you're saying, it comes as out of the blue for them. But in my head, it's like I've experienced this 5 or 6 times. I've had enough and I'm sick of it. So sometimes I have this, and I don't think it's because I don't want to address the conflict. It's just I missed my opportunity to speak up because I was thinking too much about, hey, am I being in the wrong? Am I thinking about this the wrong way? So that's how I see this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point to put it out there. I was just thinking from a perspective of, well, if the person doesn't really like conflict in general, holistically, maybe they're suppressing how
Yeah.
they really want to approach it.
Yeah, I see that too. I'm not saying that.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I was just curious, that's all. But in terms of a way to approach this is really just opening up the communication channels. And that's something that maybe you have applied at times as well, where you would voice it or you openly say, hey, I don't like the way that you've been talking to me like this.
Mm.
And it's just really slowly opening those channels of communication.
Yeah. Well, I think also in a relationship sense, what we do for this type of suppression explosion is it's not even scheduled, but we just do it from time to time. It's actually reflecting like, hey, how have you felt about our last year being together? Is there anything that you want to bring up? And it could even be like a monthly thing, could be a weekly thing. Maybe sometimes you go out for dinner together and we'll just be like, what did you think about the week? Like, what did you like? It's sort of like those weekly meetings that you have at work at Friday afternoon. What went well, what didn't go so well, what can we do next time? And it's sort of like that. And I found that this has really helped for us because it opens up the channel, because I'm that kind of person that if you haven't opened up a channel for me to speak, I'm not going to speak out of the blue unless it's something that I really need to talk about and be like, hey, this was actually disappointing here. So I think opening this space where it's that time where you're like, okay, this is a time where we can share our thoughts. We can all put our thoughts and opinions in the bag and talk about it, lay it all out. It's a very helpful time.
We actually have these conversations after every Saturday, after our dates. It's more on a reflection of, not on the deep conversations, but more on the conversations of, hey, how did we find that date or this event or whatever we went or did on that particular day? That really opens up the channel for communication as well. And yeah, it is good to sort of put it out there.
Yeah, I think those ones, the ones that we have on a weekly basis, are quite small. Like,
Yeah.
there are opportunities to talk about something deeper, but I think the deeper ones is more yearly, mostly around anniversary time. And I think it was also Jay Shetty. I think it was also a quote from someone else. And you being in a relationship and just because you're together or you're married doesn't mean you own that person for the rest of your life. Like, they still have an opportunity to either leave you at any time. And it's not leaving you as in like they cheated on you or whatever, but it's like that emotion where they don't feel connected with you anymore, or they just don't feel like they're gaining anything out of the relationship anymore. And which is true. If you think about it, the two people that are coming together for a relationship is a choice, but leaving is also a choice. So at the end of each year, especially during anniversary time, we do have these deeper conversations, and it's really reflecting back what's happened. Like, this year, has it felt a bit more distant, or has it been more rocky? Has it been really good? Like, it was good. What did we do to make it feel so secure? And it's just talking through these things.
Yeah, I own you.
Bitch.
I own you.
But yeah, so that's suppression explosion. And the other one is aggressive confrontation. So this is those ones where you see people actually are very upfront. They will aggressively tell you what they don't like and start an argument or start yelling at you and confront you about something. So this one would definitely push me away if someone was like this.
Yeah, this one's more, you could probably go abuse in some way because, yeah, they're very verbal in the way they approach things,
But
borderline rude.
bringing in perspective though, I think the beauty of this, I'm not saying that it's beauty in terms of being aggressive, but the beauty of a person like this is they're very upfront. So if they don't like something, they'll definitely come and tell you.
Yeah. The last one is actually something I like, but we actually apply this to our relationship, and that's the mediation. So essentially, it's just creating a safe environment where we can holistically come together and talk about certain things. And if there is any disagreements or things that we want to work on, it's really just sitting down and saying, hey, we need to work on this. How can we work on this? And really just working it together, putting our minds and the powers combine for
Well,
that
I think
ultimate decision.
mediation isn't about that. I think mediation is really that strategy of sitting that person down, sitting your partner down and laying out your current feelings and actually talking about it on a level and a calm note. And then it's not just leaving them with your feedback, but it's also being, hey, how can we work on this together? And how can I help you and how can you help me so that we can better our relationship? So I think this is the best form of a fight communication because you're actually trying to actively work on the next step. So rather than being like, hey, you did this, I didn't like it, made me angry. But then it's like, what do we do from that? Like, you didn't come with a point of how do we move forward. So mediation is great because you come to either you compromise or you work together, come with a plan of action.
Yeah, this is the best form of fight language. It's like sparring, getting ready for a fight, but you're working together.
Yeah. So from these 5, do you think that you lean towards just one or do you have a few that you think you lean towards?
Yes, as I mentioned, I think we definitely, well, we definitely feel, I feel that.
I feel, you feel, we all feel, we feel.
I feel that we definitely do more on a mediation perspective.
Well, I think I actually use a whole mixture of a few. So I think reflection action is something that I do because that goes with the suppression explosion. It's because I need to go back and think about what happened or if I need to say something, if I need to take action, or did I take things the wrong way? Like I usually think about, am I the one in the wrong? Did I do something? Did I think the wrong way? Did I take it the wrong way? So that's why I need to reflect. But then I'm also sometimes the suppression explosion, and it's mostly because I don't know if I should be expressing something or if I should be voicing something. So I have that. And then, yeah, I definitely think that mediation for us too, as a couple, we do mediation as well.
Yeah. And thinking about it, in the past, I definitely did use a lot of what you just mentioned, the expression to explosion. I think I'm someone that really did bottle up a lot and then kaput at the very end.
I think you still do sometimes,
Yeah.
and it's not the explosion. Like explosion, you think is very intense, but I think for you is maybe that hesitation side of you, because for the most part, I might say something, could come off as complaining, but I might be saying something, and then you don't usually reply much, or until like a massive conflict happens, then you blurt out all these things that you're like, oh, but this happened, and then to me, I'm like, how come you didn't voice these in the past? And in the past of these types of disagreements, you always mention is you just didn't want to say it yet, or you didn't want to voice it yet. So it's a bit of that suppression, maybe just suppression rather than suppression explosion.
Yeah, probably more suppression on the fact of not wanting to say it straight. Because, like I said, I'm a person that is very much, I'll tell you how it is and as aggressive and as harsh as it is. And it's not because I want to be mean or an asshole about it. I just really want to tell you how it is. But a lot of people take it offensively. So that's why I reserve myself back to suppress it.
Mm.
Yeah. Now that we've got all of that out on our episode, what are some helpful ways we have used in terms of building a better communication? or improving communication?
Well, the big one I think is if you really sense, or if I've really sensed that communication has changed, like you really haven't been talking to me much, like that's just as simple as updating me on your day because that's what we do. I understand that not every couple do that. Some people just like to enjoy their day. They don't share every single small detail, whereas we do. We're like, oh my God, I just saw this, or like, I just saw the cutest dog. And if I notice there's a lack of that, where you're not really sharing as much of the small details, uh, I will start to voice and be like, "Hey, how come? Like, what have you been doing lately? Or like, how are you lately? Or like, what's changed?" And it's genuinely asking because then that opens up that communication. And like I said earlier, it really builds that genuine connection where you're wanting to get to know that other person. Like we have been together for 12 years, but you still need to want to get to know or be curious about what's happening in that person's day to day.
Yeah, and I think over time your communication style does change as you get older and things like that. So it's really just making sure that you as a couple really bring and hone it together and working it with each other. So as you change a little bit, you're expressing to your partner that, hey, look, this has changed now, and you guys are working together. It's kind of like that stepping stone where you're building that step, but you're also bringing your partner along with you, so that things aren't broken down or misunderstood as you progress.
Mm. Yeah, and I think for me, going back to that suppression or like not voicing things earlier, I think I do voice things a lot earlier now. And it's not voicing as in like I was disappointed or like this and that wasn't happening. It's more that if I do feel something at that point in time, I'll just voice it right away. Like, oh my God, that's so cool. Or like, oh, I didn't like that. And that's really just my trial and error and practice to see how much I should hold back and how much I should actually be straightforward and open and honest in communicating. And I found that that's really helped because that's also helped me not suppress too much where I leave something too long and then it actually becomes a problem. Like you want to find things where you can prevent it becoming a problem. And that's really helped me.
Yeah. And I think the ultimate one that I found that has helped significantly was really just the catch ups. So opening up that dialogue, opening up that space to talk openly, where it could be a weekly, a fortnightly, or a monthly thing, or even a yearly thing or a quarterly thing where you guys just come together and just like what we do, we essentially, fuck, I forgot that damn word.
I know what you're trying to say.
No, no, I'm thinking I've got it. It's in my. It's like it's like the 56K dial up. And has like doing that. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now. Fuck. It's where you like come together and really just rehone and recalibrate your whole year essentially. So I feel like when we did more, that really did help us.
Mm. And some couples may like to actually schedule this in because I've watched a few people who on YouTube and stuff and they do relationship topics and they actually schedule this in. For us, ours is quite candid. It's not dead set, it has to be weekly, dead set, it has to be monthly. I know the one that we always do is anniversary just because it's natural to really talk about the past year. But sometimes we might have it more occasionally, like the ones, say we have a Saturday night date, we go out and we just talk about things, talk about life, and then that life might lead into deeper conversations. And being this week, I felt like things weren't as good, or this week was really great. And it just becomes a candid conversation. So for us, we don't actually schedule something physically. It's just if it happens, we just allow it to happen rather than giving that reaction like, whoa, why are we talking about deep topics right now? Because if that happened, that would push me away. I'd be like, okay, fine, maybe I can't be as open as I wanted to. I think it
Yeah.
works well because if I start saying something deep, you're fine to go with it. And that kind of brought a thought to me because in the past, I know that I'm a person that if I think about a deep topic, not because I wanted to talk about it, sometimes it's just a curious thing that I want to explore, I'll talk about it. And I've had people in the past, like friends or and the other people that I'm talking to, they're just like, whoa, that was so random, or like, whoa, that was so deep. And although that just sounds like a general comment, it does push me away because I'm like, okay, maybe this person is uncomfortable with the way that I think. Whereas with you, when I just blurt out something random that's like deep and I truly just want to explore it, and it doesn't mean that I'm thinking a bad way or thinking a good way. It's just a genuine question that just came to my head, and you're open to explore it with me. It does open that space.
Yeah, and talking about being open, voicing concerns and things like that up front, that's really, really important. But also keeping, like I said, that space to talk and that being present moment is really important. It's really just trying to remember, hey, look, if your partner or if you're voicing something that, you've got issues or you're concerns about, it's really just taking that concern on board and really just trying to figure out how do you work with it. Because I know sometimes we get a little defensive because they might bring up something that you're like, hang on, that just took you out of, you didn't even think of that. Why are you thinking like that? And it's really just remembering, hey, they're voicing that concern for a reason. And it's really just working with your partner together.
Well, I don't think it has to even be in a concerned space. Like, if you're just genuinely updating your day and you're talking to your partner, like I'm talking to you, and I find that you're on your phone, you're not really looking at me, there's no eye contact, I definitely feel those times does push me away, because then I lead to think like, why am I even spending my time standing here when I could be working on other things to talk to you about my day, but you choose to look at your laptop or you choose to look at your phone instead of actually listening to me. So actually being present when your partner is actually talking to you, especially if it's like a date, or you're sitting down having lunch, something like that, where you can actually be present. I feel those are really important, because when you don't, it does snowball into things like arguments, and it's these simple moments like you really need to be present.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully that gives you guys a good way to approach, or even just tips as to how to navigate communication breakdown in your relationship or just holistically. But let us know in the comments or even in the DMs if there's anything that we missed or what you guys have tried personally that worked for you.
Let us know in the DMs.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Goodbye.
Peace.